Welcome to the DFI Podcast, where we go deep on Web3 infrastructure and services. Today, we are very proud to welcome Ansgar as our guest. Ansgar, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here.
Let's go.
We've been talking about
fucking psyched.
We are too. Well, there's so much going on in your project, Saturn. We want to hear all about it. There's a lot to chat with you about. Ishan, maybe you can kind of start us off, we have a lot of questions, maybe just kind of get into your background to get us started.
Yeah, sounds good. So this is the last episode of season 1. We will be off for about 2 months, give or take, and then we'll be back with season 2. So Ansgar, you're the last person, you're on the last episode of season 1.
Last but not least, baby.
Exactly, you know it. Awesome. We want to learn so much about Saturn and decentralized CDNs. But the first thing I want to ask you is I would love to hear a little bit about your background and specifically how you got into Web3. And what about Web3 makes you what gets you super excited about Web3?
All right, man, let's dive in. Because I've had a rather circuitous serpentine path to Web3, if you will. So if we go back and trace it, really the beginnings of that circuitous path to Web3 begins when I built one of the world's largest YouTube to MP3 converters way back in the day. And this is a website where people could go and they could enter a YouTube link, press record, and get an MP3. And I hope the IAA is not listening. But one of the profound lessons I learned from running this site, which had many, many millions of users, 50 million and up users a month, was incentives are really hard. Like when you run a website that's powered by ads and ads alone, it can be tough just to make a bunch of money, and especially when server costs are enormous. And when you record a bunch of MP3s and distribute MP3s to 50 million users a month, your bandwidth bill is also enormous. And the lessons learned from running this YouTube MP3 converter pushed me into the prior project before building Saturn. And that prior project was a startup called ARC, A-R-C. And it's still live, arc.io, arc.io. And the fundamental premise of ARC was, wait a second, can you kill two birds with one stone? Can you kill the monetization aspect of software? And can you kill the distribution difficulties of software with one product? And the way ARC worked was, it was a little piece of JavaScript that you could add to your website. And once added, all users on your website would connect peer-to-peer in the browser and exchange content amongst themselves. So it was a 10 times cheaper way to distribute content. And more so, if you're a website owner, if the users on your website contributed more to the network than you as a website owner use. So for example, let's say all the users on your website contributed 100 petabytes of bandwidth to the network, but your website only used 10. That delta, 90 petabytes, could be resold to the network, and you could make money off of that, essentially surplus. And so we built this enormous peer-to-peer network, 100 million monthly users were exchanging content and over ARC. And what we found out was we really wanted a better incentive mechanism to align participants in the network. We had 100 million peers, 100 million browsers every single month exchanging content. But we really wanted people to stay online longer, leave their browsers open, to remunerate users for their contributions to the network, that kind of thing. And that just gets really hard with fiat, with dollars. Because ideally what you want to do is every time someone, with their browser submits and contributes bandwidth to the network, they can be remunerated with a penny, a tenth of a penny, a hundredth of a penny. And that gets really tough and tricky to do with fiat because, payout processors, whether it be PayPal or Stripe, you can't pay someone a hundredth of a penny at a time. It doesn't make any sense. And the other piece here was we wanted finer grained controls to encourage and incent behavior that we desired. So for example, leave your browser open and you could be kind of a super node in the network and start sharing more and more content. So what that led us to was a lot of discoveries. Oh, there's one other piece I don't want to forget, which is also the content addressability aspect. So we had this enormous network, 100 million peers a month exchanging data, but they were still exchanging data essentially around URLs, say what was the URL, the content you want to be fetched. And that actually, trying to solve that problem pushed us into, or the problem of how peers would discover content and find out what content was available and peers in the network near them, pushed us towards content discovery via content addressability, where instead of fetching a piece of content via website.com/cat.ping, you'd fetch it via its hash, in this case, via its SID. We'll get there in a second. And so it was through these incentive mechanisms and through finding and downloading content based on hashes that really pushed us into Web3. And that was kind of the beginning of what engendered and beget Saturn. The very beginning is all these lessons learned from running this enormous peer-to-peer network that was built to solve the problems of running the YouTube to MP3 converter prior. And that is really those three stones in a row of what lands us on Saturn and in building a giant crypto incentivized, decentralized content delivery network.
Very cool. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about actually, before we get into Saturn, right? I want to take a step back and kind of talk about, what is a decentralized content delivery network? Maybe, you give like a 1 minute on what a CDN is for people who are listening and watching who don't know. And then what is a decentralized CDN and why is it important, for the open web?
Yeah, baby, let's jump in. So the way I would describe Saturn is a decentralized, crypto incentivized content delivery network. Those three pieces. So let's zoom out and let's figure out what those three pieces mean. So there's decentralized, crypto incentivized, and content delivery network. And just like this is the last podcast of the year, let's start at the end with what is a CDN? So a CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. And what a content delivery network is, Saturn is not the only CDN, nor was it the first, is a giant world-scale network of computers all around the world that cache content, and cache means it will store data temporarily, not forever, and it stores that data close to users so it can be sent to users quickly. The best analogy I have is one of logistics and supply chain. So a content delivery network is a network kind of like Amazon.com for delivering goods. So let's say you open up Amazon.com and buy a pair of AirPods, a set of AirPods. When you press buy, that AirPods ships to you from a warehouse that's very close to you, proximate to you. And Amazon has enormous warehouses where they have tons and tons of goods, but that's not where those AirPods will be sent to you from. They'll be sent to you from a smaller warehouse that's much closer to you because it's cheaper and faster to ship to you from a warehouse that's close to you rather than an enormous one further away. And a content delivery network on the internet is the same. So a content delivery network on the internet means it's a bunch of machines all over the world that are kind of smaller warehouses. So they store less content, but they store that content much closer to you. So that, for example, when you consume this podcast and you press play and you get to listen to our three golden voices talk, that audio file is going to be sent to you, not from an enormous data center really far away, but from a smaller data center with a content delivery node in it to you. So it's faster and cheaper to deliver to you. So that's kind of what a content delivery network is. Imagine logistics hub, logistics center, if you will, of the internet for delivering content.
I love the way that you explained that and defined that. That was so clear, so concise.
I appreciate that.
Everybody knows what an Amazon, delivery hub is. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So in many ways, content delivery networks are the logistics of the internet, the highways and the warehouses of the internet that move content around. Now, the second piece, let's go walk backwards again. What is the crypto incentivized piece mean? So crypto incentivized means, so my favorite word in all of Web3, by the way, is incentive. If you want something to get done, provide an incentive to do it, and you will find it gets done. The tricky piece, of course, is finding the right incentives, maintaining the right incentives. But that's my favorite word in all of Web3, incentive, incentive, incentive. So crypto incentive. Saturn is a crypto incentivized content delivery network. What does that mean? What that means is all actors and participants in the Saturn network. And when I say Saturn network, I mean, imagine that giant Amazon logistics hub of warehouses. Those warehouses are run by independent people. I don't know who they are. Anyone can sign up and run one of these hubs and deliver content. And so they need to be incentivized to deliver that content. And so Saturn monitors, the software monitors how many goods, if you will, like how many AirPods an individual warehouse will send, in this case for Saturn, how much content, how many requests, and how many bytes of content that node is providing to the network. And then they're remunerated for the content that they serve and the performance with which they delivered that content. So we've established incentives to both deliver content and deliver it quickly, cheaply, and reliably. So as an example, if you have a node and you're running a Saturn node and that node goes offline, you will have rewards taken from you. On the flip side, if you're running a node and it's fast, online for a long period of time, delivering lots of content, pushing a lot of bandwidth quickly, rewards run to you. And so in this way, the incentive mechanism is built to be a performant node, a reliable node in the network. And that's the crypto incentives piece, is that these actors in the network are rewarded for good behavior. And the last piece, decentralized, again, we're going backwards here, the last piece, the decentralization piece, to me, this is the fundamental tenet which unlocks Saturn's potential. And this is anyone in the world can run a node. All Saturn software is open source. You can go on GitHub and take a look at all the software we've written and other people have contributed to, and other people write as well. And you can go hack on it, modify it, and do whatever you want with it. And in turn, it's all just a giant network of machines talking this software. And anyone can run a node. So you, your mother, your dog, your neighbor, anyone can run a node. And in this way, it's fully decentralized, where there are pieces of it, where we run and as the network's taking off. It's not completely fully decentralized yet. We're getting there inch by inch, piece by piece. But right, like the actual network of nodes is decentralized. They all talk amongst each other with software that we've written, and anyone can run a node. And the reason this unlocks the growth of the network is it's not on us to sit down, have a meeting, pull out our checkbook and say, we're going to build a data center in Omaha and light up a bunch of infrastructure there. Instead, what we do is we write the software that anyone can run, and someone in Omaha can say, there's a lot of opportunity here to run a node, and they can go take the opportunity and seize it themselves. We don't make that decision. The network does. And in that way, there's supply and demand and a marketplace that's built. And we've seen how potent, how absolute gasoline to a fire this decentralization aspect is, because Saturn has just grown in absolute leaps and voracious bounds. So to give you a sense of how fast of a growth rate this unlocks, so Saturn launched a little less than a year ago, or about a year ago, and recently the network hit 25 terabits a second of capacity. That's about a tenth the size of Cloudflare than a year, but the biggest piece of that is this rate at which we hit that capacity. So Saturn went from 0 to 25 terabits of capacity in a year. It took Cloudflare 10 years, and it took Fastly 7 years to build that same 25 terabits of capacity that we built in 1 year. And again, this is leaning into the decentralization aspect. We, the Saturn team, did not get our hands in a bunch of data centers and plug in a bunch of machines and plug in the Ethernet and update, Linux and whatnot. We didn't do any of that. We just wrote the software and other people did that. And that's the key aspect here of decentralization. So let's tie all three back together with this magical thread. So Saturn is a decentralized, crypto-incentivized content delivery network. So what that means is a network of machines running open source software all around the world where anyone can contribute. And everyone who contributes is incentivized to be a good participant in the network for everyone's benefit. And what do? They deliver content around the world like an Amazon logistics network hub. So that's what Saturn is in a nutshell.
That was a great explanation. I feel like I learned quite a bit about Saturn. So one thing I do want to ask you about is why is a decentralized CDN important, right? Why is it better than centralized CDNs like Cloudflare? What features or technologies does it offer that a centralized CDN can't? And then I guess, do you imagine a world or do you see a real possibility of decentralized CDNs having large market shares?
Yeah, that's a great question. So why the hell are we always spending all of our time doing this? Why are we building all this? Why are we choosing our finite breaths to go build and engender this? So to me, the most exciting aspect about Saturn is what separates it from all prior CDNs built in the past. So let's walk backwards. Let's hold hands and walk backwards through a little bit of history of what content delivery networks are and how they came to be. So we just kind of explained a content delivery network is this giant logistics hub of the internet to deliver bytes around the internet instead of AirPods. How did they come about? The first true content delivery network was a company called Akamai, started in Cambridge by a bunch of MIT graduates around the turn of the millennium, 1998, 1999. And the problem they set out to solve was before content delivery networks, if you ran a web server and ran a website and 1 million people all over the world tried to access that website, for most users, it would be slow because imagine you're in Mumbai in India and you try and access and load a website that's run on a server in California. It's a long trip time between. And the other problem was one of availability. You have 1 million users all around the world that are all trying to load the same website. The server in California melts. So Akamai was built, and content delivery networks are built to solve these two problems of availability and speed, scale and speed. And since then, the past 20 years, they've grown to enormity. Akamai is a multi-billion-dollar company. Cloudflare is a $25 billion company. Fastly is a multi-billion-dollar company. There are lots of other content delivery networks. So back to the germane opposite question. Why Saturn? What sets Saturn apart? Why is Saturn different and special? To me, what's so special about Saturn is the decentralized crypto incentivized aspect because it lets everyone participate. And now, why is that important? It's important because Saturn is built much more like a marketplace where anyone can add a node to the network and contribute to the network and be remunerated and incented to do that. And in turn, that leads to a larger network in more places around the world to deliver content faster and cheaper. So in some ways, you can imagine all the prior CDNs in the past, Akamai, Cloudflare, Fastly, they're all kind of centrally organized or vertically integrated in the sense that they own all the servers and all the data centers. They're the ones that write all the software, and they're the ones that orchestrate it. Saturn has the opportunity to grow larger, faster, and cheaper because anyone can contribute. So we, Saturn, don't need to go out and raise more money to go buy more hardware, to hire more people to go install those servers in some data center in Omaha and maintain that server. Other people can do that. And why would they want to do that? Again, because they can plug in hardware and start being remunerated, being paid for their contributions to the network. And we've seen how quickly this network can grow and self-assemble, like the statistics I mentioned a second ago. So the end goal of Saturn is to be the world's largest, fastest, cheapest content delivery network. And how do we get there? We're cooking with completely different gasoline. It's asymmetric warfare, where we don't have to build this infrastructure ourselves. We write the software and other people, build the actual infrastructure and are rewarded for it. They're incented to. And so that will yield a larger, faster network. Because in the content delivery game, the closer you can move the bytes to the person requesting the bytes, the faster and cheaper it is. And Saturn has an opportunity to be closer to end users than anyone else prior in human history because of this decentralization aspect. So that's what personally excites me about it so much.
So does this mean... Sorry, continue.
Well, I was going to say, the one other interesting aspect to me is also the open source aspect, is that all of our software is open source. So in many ways, the software is owned by humanity. Anyone can contribute, anyone can fork it, anyone can modify it, and anyone can contribute. And that's also a very different model. So other content delivery networks, of course, use open source software, but the whole stack is not open source. You can't just press fork and build your own Fastly if you wanted. You can't just build your own Cloudflare. You can with Saturn. And that's different. That's fundamentally a different kind of governance and ownership model where anyone can contribute, not just in terms of running a node, but also in terms of the actual software itself. Yeah, Sean, you were saying?
So yeah, actually I have 2 points now. So one thing we don't talk about often enough in crypto and Web3 is that in a decentralized crypto incentivized model, right? The fact that your software is open source isn't a detriment to your business, right? It's actually an enablement or an accelerant. And the reason is basically, one, because we have this crypto incentive mechanisms that are built into the protocol, people need to be able to verify, the actual open source code isn't doing something, malignant or bad. But also that means that anyone can run it and make improvements on it. Whereas in the centralized world, they don't want you to do that, right? They want to make the improvements. They want to have total control. But in open source crypto networks, anyone adding value to the network will add value for everyone else in the network.
That's exactly right. And we see this over and over again with a lot of open source projects, but this is more than an open source project. This is a living open source being where there's an entire network where everybody's running open source software and everybody's hacking on this. And I like the pithy statement of Saturn is owned by humanity, not just the network, but the entire software stack itself.
Very cool. So I then brings me to my next question on running a node. So it sounds like centralized cloud providers, they build their own data centers or they lease data centers and they install hardware for this content delivery network. With Saturn, you guys are able to build we're able to build a much bigger network for two reasons, it sounds like. One is that, these small data centers have been slowly losing their lunch money to Amazon and Cloudflare and et cetera over the last decade. You can see, the amount of, the average data center is getting bigger, but the amount of data centers that are there are actually getting less. Right. So it looks like if you're a data center looking to, you're losing your lunch money to Amazon because they're able to offer so many software services that others can't. These data centers could monetize through Web3 infrastructure protocols like Saturn. Right. And then the second thing is it also sounds like consumers who have high-end hardware with good internet connection, like, my MacBook Pro or gaming machines or Xboxes or whatever, can also run the Saturn software, generate income for themselves, but also like bring content closer to the network. Now, are both of those things how you think about like go to market or am I missing something there?
No, you're not missing something. You are ahead of the curve and you're skating to where the puck will be. That one of our future goals with Saturn is to unite all devices on the planet into this network so that all these devices are sharing content amongst themselves. And that means going like kind of uniting the Saturn that we built so far, which is a network of machines and data centers right now, with kind of the prior model or similarities with Arc, the prior peer-to-peer product where browsers exchange data. What do I mean by this is we would love every device, whether you are a server in a data center, to your laptop or desktop, to a browser, to a phone, to both be a local cache and a local peer in this giant world scale content delivery network. So that you could pull out your phone and listen to this podcast, and pieces of this podcast could come from a phone that is in the same apartment complex as you, and they can send that content to you as found and discovered by the content identifier, as well as a data center near you, and everything in between. That's really the high level goal. What we'd love to do is take this magical thread, which is this open source Saturn software, and weave a worldwide fabric across all devices. So essentially, imagine a world where every single device both retrieves and contributes to a network. And that network is, finds content, discovers content by its content identifier, and everyone can be rewarded for their contributions to the network. That's where we want to take this. That's where we're going. So this world scale, everyone participates. Everyone's incentivized to participate in network.
I love it. That's super cool. I think this is one of my favorite things about, Web3 and crypto incentivized networks is that anyone can join and add value to the network. I do have one question about bandwidth. So I think one of the reasons why these centralized cloud providers or centralized CDNs, et cetera, they use data centers is because these data centers have like really, really high bandwidth, like 10 gigabits per second, 100 gigabits per second, while a consumer might, even in a place like America where we have relatively fast internet, might only have like 100 megabits per second or 300 megabits per second. How do you make sure that, people are able to get their content with low latency in those kinds of situations?
That's a great question. So right now, to run a Saturn node, there are minimum hardware requirements. And part of those minimum hardware requirements is a minimum upload speed. Right now, today, that's 10 gigabits a second or up. So if you try and join the network and don't satisfy 10 gigabits a second or up, the network essentially says not yet. We want to allow you to join the network. You can't join as a peer. Now, you raise a great point, which is for users, this is in the future. We're talking about the future now. When everyone can run a node and contribute and participate, most people right now do not have fat upload pipes in their residence. So like fixed internet. Even here in the United States, I speak to you from sunny paradisiacal San Diego right now. My internet connection here is a DOCSIS cable connection. So, it's 250 down, but only like 25 up, something like that. It's asymmetric. It's not symmetrical. And many people share internet connections like that. But also beyond that is also simply the reliability aspect, is that services and machines running in a data center have much higher availability in uptimes than a machine like a laptop in someone's home. So right now, the world of Saturn is only servers and data centers because we want to make sure that performance stays high, especially as the network gets off the ground. In the future, when more devices join the network, we would use a number of variegated software techniques to help fend against these problems with latency. Here's an example. So let's say you start fetching content and you want to download this podcast. Instead of connecting to one peer who hosts the entire podcast and you download from that peer or node in the network, instead what you could do is take the podcast, break it into a bunch of pieces, erase or encode all those pieces, and sprinkle those pieces across a number of devices. And then you could connect to a number of machines, download a number of pieces, and even if some don't make it due to the magic of erasure encoding, where essentially every piece stores a little bit of redundant data of the others, you could reassemble the whole podcast. Now, again, we're not there yet, but this is where we're going. This is where we want to take Saturn when it achieves this world scale network where everyone participates. So where we are right now, it's all servers in data centers. You have to meet a pretty steep minimum set of hardware requirements to join and run a Saturn node right now, and that's on purpose. And in the future, we will start lessening that as the software catches up and lets more and more people participate, if that makes sense.
I love that. I really think that crypto protocols that are building, decentralized physical infrastructure networks, right, or DPINs, they need to start at a place where, like, you incentivize the data centers to join first and then the users, especially because, like, I have one of the fastest internets that you can get. I have 1,000 upload and download, and I still, it still probably wouldn't be good enough for me if, somebody else who had 1,000 upload and download was serving me content, right? So I do think, like, progressive decentralization and progressive, lowering the requirements over time is going to be a winner. Plus, we all know, like, bandwidth is going to go up over time, right? Like, as more people get online, there are more applications. You're going to see at some point, like, even wireless will be able to handle thousands of megabits per second. So I definitely think we're going in that direction.
So in aggregate, what we see in much of the Western world is a general increase in bandwidth in residences to fixed internet of about 20 to 25% a year. So this is, if you plotted it over many years, the internet gets in aggregate download and upload about 25% fast, 20 to 25% faster year over year. And you're 100% right about the, like, starting with the higher minimum hardware requirements and kind of lowering them. And one of the reasons why is you have to remember, on the other side of this, there are customers purchasing bandwidth from the network, and you need to have the performance be there, reliable, and fast to have customers want to pay. And that's the whole flywheel that goes around, is what customers pay ends up getting paid out to all the nodes. So you want as many people buying capacity from the network and buying distribution from the network as possible. And to do that, you have to be reliable. You have to be fast. So in some ways, you don't want to have the network grow and let in a bunch of nodes that might be non-performant or non-reliable until the software is there. And we can get the software there. It's just we're not there yet. We're on the path there.
Makes sense. Cool. So I think one of the last questions I have, at least from my side, is I would love to hear a lot of, or whatever you can share about, like, the crypto incentives that you're building. Like, is there going to be a token? Is it going to be a, on-chain system of, a record of who's providing what content? If so, is it going to be like a layer 1 or a layer 2 or a layer 3, right? Like, how do you think about these things? What do the crypto incentives look like?
Yeah, great question. So again, to establish importance here, crypto incentivized is one of the fundamental tenets of Saturn. That's one of the things that makes it special and separates it from all other prior CDNs. And now, whether Saturn's going to have its own token or not, that's an active conversation. I can't come here and say definitively yes or no that we will or we won't, but there are many boons of having our own token. And one of them is this freedom and agency to have much finer grained controls around incentives. So, for example, if we go back to the prior startup, Arc, which was the giant peer-to-peer network where browsers exchange content with 100 million users a month, we really wanted finer grained controls over incentives. We wanted to be able to say, if a peer, again, this is a browser and the network, stays online for longer, they get rewarded more juicily, dare I say. And we wanted to be able to play with this at a rapid clip because, like, just in classic startup sense, you want to iterate like crazy. And so we want to do the same thing with Saturn. What does it look like when on a Tuesday you can establish some sort of improved incentives and say, hey, there's an opening in the network in Kazakhstan. There's a ton of requests that are now flowing into the network, but there's not a lot of nodes there. And to be able to say, look, if you add nodes and capacity in Kazakhstan, you'll reap the rewards. And be able to kind of iterate rapidly on these types of things. And we don't right now in Saturn have the ability to do that. Our tool set for crypto incentives is not there yet. And having our own token helps us get there, but it's not a panacea or a one-size-fits-all solution there. But the way I think about crypto incentives, which is kind of one part of the thrust of your question, is there's good behavior and bad behavior. And you want to incentivize good behavior and disincentivize bad behavior. And the more rapidly you can kind of iterate on these things, you learn things every single day by watching the network. You find out ways that kind of nodes are, I don't want to say cheating the network, but like finding out ways that they're collecting rewards, and maybe they're collecting more rewards than you'd like, or other nodes aren't collecting as much a reward as you'd like them to. And you want to be able to tweak this. And when you build on another cryptocurrency, right now Saturn is built on top of Filecoin, we lose some sort of agency here or independence on how to do this. That said, we also gain a lot of the advantages of, when we're running on Filecoin. There's a lot of infrastructure built on Filecoin. We run a bunch of smart contracts on the FEM, and we'd like to do more of that and run more smart contracts on the FEM. But so I'm not sure whether we'll have our own token or not. That's a question that we're kind of figuring out as of now and discussing what problems that really solve for us and how it would solve those problems. But the real nut here is, me personally, I just want to be able to iterate on incentives much, much faster. Is instead of like having some long improvement process that might take a year to drive through, at least in the beginning, before, as the network is taking off, be able to iterate on this stuff rapidly. And just say, so here's another good example. Let's get concrete. So right now, there's a minimum set of hardware requirements for a node to join the network. And we just kind of talked about why that's important. And that set of hardware requirements is universal. Whether you're spinning up a node in New York City or in Mumbai, that set of hardware requirements applies. And that's not a good model because the cost to run infrastructure in Mumbai is not the same as New York. You know, like the same infrastructure in Mumbai is going to be more expensive than it is in New York. And one of the things we'd like to do is establish incentives such that if you put up a node in a place where it's much more expensive to run one of these nodes, you might get more of the rewards to you because relatively you're supplying a lot more capacity to the network than someone in New York would, if that makes sense. You know, because the cost is actually higher in those other locations. And it's like, this is something that came out of having a minimum set of hardware requirements and seeing what kind of nodes are popping up all over the world and how many. And so, like, we see this, we'd like to react, and we'd like to have some sort of mechanism to do this at a rapid clip. And there's all sorts of examples like this where we'd like to play with in the classic kind of startup sense. You just want to iterate like crazy. So
could you do something like what Helium did, where, like, you know, if there were a lot of nodes in a certain area and you spun an extra node up, you might get less rewards. But, like, you know, if there was no nodes in a certain area, now let's just take Mumbai as an example because we're already using it. Say there were no nodes in Mumbai and someone spins it up, then they get more rewards. Is that something that you could control if you had your own, you know, crypto incentive design?
So it is. And to be clear, that's already the case with the built-in reward system as it is.
Very
and
cool.
Here's why. So imagine there's kind of this ambient noise in the background, which is the number of requests, a request load in a given region. So there are a number of users in and around Mumbai who are requesting content from Saturn. And if there's not a node in Mumbai, that request is going to be satisfied by a node nearby. And if you build the first node in Mumbai, if you spin up the first node in Mumbai, then all those requests that are coming near Mumbai or being made near Mumbai are going to flow to you, and you will earn a bunch of rewards for that. So that's already built in. What I'm more talking about is the relative scale of rewards. So exactly like you talked about, if there are 50 nodes in New York City and you spin up node number 51, you're not going to earn that many rewards because the request load of all the users in New York City is going to be split amongst 50 nodes and now 51. Like the relative amount you're going to receive is going to be less than if you're the only node in an area. But as far as hardware requirements go, it costs more to spin up a node and run a node in Mumbai than it does in New York. And our incentives don't quite fit that as well as they could, if that makes sense. So yes, if you spin up a node and you're the first node in a region, you're already going to receive the most rewards. And we see this already. There are nodes, for example, there's one node in Peru, and there's not that many nodes in Peru, and a bunch of request load in Peru, and they're one of the highest earning nodes in the network running in Peru. You know, and so because there's just not a lot of competition. So for everyone listening, if you have infrastructure in Peru and you're a hungry boy or girl, go spin up a node in Peru. There's a juicy steak just waiting for you to bite in. But yeah, so like that kind of incentive is already there. But we like to have finer grained controls and iterate around that.
Cool. So, all right. I guess I had a two-part question earlier. So we talked about crypto, right? I would love to hear, are you guys using any sort of on-chain mechanisms? Is anything being stored on-chain? I know not all decentralized compute protocols need to have an on-chain mechanism, right? So just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, great question. So right now, a bunch of the payout infrastructure is run on-chain with smart contracts. And so, for example, you run a node and how much you earn and whatnot, that's stored in a smart contract, and you can claim from that. But we want to bring everything else and store it on-chain so it's all public and verifiable. We're not there yet. You know, our modus operandi from day one has been ship, just ship as much software as fast as possible and iteratively decentralize over time. And so there are key aspects of Saturn which are not fully decentralized yet. We want all data, including all earnings, all, you know, like whenever two nodes exchange data, that information is stored on chain and can be publicly verifiable, and not all that is yet. But we are building that and iteratively decentralizing over time. So for example, like one of the things that we were waiting on to do this was FVM. Is we were kind of gate locked a bit. So for those listening who aren't familiar with FVM, FVM stands for Filecoin Virtual Machine. And it lets you run smart contracts like the EVM or Ethereum Virtual Machine does on the Filecoin blockchain. And before FEM, because Saturn is built on top of Filecoin, we did not have a tool here to write and build a lot of decentralized computation. And when FEM came out, we immediately jumped on, immediately seized it, and moved our payouts infrastructure to all running on smart contracts in a decentralized manner. And now that FEM is out, we're leaning into that and iteratively decentralizing more and more. So we're kind of gated there for a little bit, but now that FEM launched, we have as another tool in our toolbox to iteratively decentralize. And we are going to decentralize all this stuff, but iteratively over time. We want to both build a product and bring it to market as a content delivery network as quickly as possible. And iteratively decentralize over time. So not everything's there, but we're getting there.
Awesome. Cool. I think those are all the questions on my list. I think, Wes, I know you had a bunch of questions off the list. I feel like, we should go through those.
This is, there's so much. I'm going to try to narrow it as best I can. But, with thinking about the global network that you've built with Saturn, there's this whole world of other folks that are trying to build different decentralized technologies, whether it's AI inference or database or a website or Lambda functions. And for each of those, in today's world, they get it through, website.com, and then it routes, and Amazon, whoever they use would have a nice load balancer in front of their service, and it would send the request out as needed, things like that. Is there a scenario where Saturn becomes sort of a front end for these other Web3 services in the future beyond maybe just content delivery, or is Saturn like squarely focused on content as its
great question?
Its goal
right now. There's an old saying I like, which is chase two rabbits, catch neither. So right now, focus is paramount. We are hell-bent, maniacally focused on solving the content delivery problem. Why are we hell-bent and maniacally focused on solving the content delivery problem? Because there is no Web3 decentralized content delivery network that can provide and meet needs right now. Like if you wanted to build Web3 scale YouTube right now, you cannot. And that is an uncomfortable truth that we all need to look in the mirror and accept. And one of the reasons you can't build a Web3 scale YouTube is there's no Web3 scale distribution that can keep up with YouTube scale. And so until that problem is solved, Saturn has not checked the CDN box. Now, that said, while we're hell-bent maniacally focused on content delivery right now, and there's a clear and transparent, conspicuous need there, that does not mean that Saturn is only going to do content delivery network. Only going to deliver content, only going to be CDN. No, that we absolutely are going to have multiple kinds of nodes in the network. Right now, they're all kind of CDN edge cache nodes, but we are going to come out with nodes and plan to have nodes that also store content more permanently, so you can have kind of an S3 storage layer. So you can also store your data and accelerate it. So for example, if you use Amazon, AWS, and it's a very common use case for someone to store data on S3, which is their object storage service, and then accelerate with CloudFront, which is their CDN. So it's like CloudFront in front of S3. Yeah. And so Saturn will provide that in the future. And then we'd also love to do beyond that is also provide compute. So one of the directions that the CDN market at large is heading is serverless, or running little jobs as close to the end user as possible, just like data is stored as close to the end user as possible. And so that's actually a very hard problem, though. It's a very hard problem for decentralized trustless networks, because with Saturn right now, there's a way where you can take advantage of this enormous network of trustless nodes, because if you request content by the hash, you can verify the data you receive from an untrusted node via the hash of that content you receive. So when you receive a piece of content, let's say you request a picture of a cat, and you get back a piece of content, you know the hash, you can hash the picture of the cat and say, does it match? I got byte for byte back what I wanted. The problem is for compute, as of right now, there is no such verification. So this is actually an area where Web3 CDN or Web3 networks at large are trying to solve as rapidly as we can, because it's a disadvantage against kind of centralized trusted infrastructure. Amazon has no problem right now, if you trust Amazon, of running compute jobs, because you hand them a pile of JavaScript, they run a pile of JavaScript on a node, and you trust Amazon. You trust they're going to do a good job. If you hand a pile of JavaScript right now to an untrusted Saturn node or any other node in the network, you immediately start running into problems of, do I trust that they added 2 + 2 and got 4 and not 86.483, Yeah. And so that is an open, unsolved problem in just trustless computing in general. And to me, that's an area of under active development. One of the most exciting companies that follows, like Zama, they're working on homomorphic encryption, trying to solve this kind of thing. But no, let's zoom back into Saturn. Saturn's hell-bent to content delivery network now. Next would be storage. And then beyond that would be compute and bringing compute to the edge of the network. And again, Saturn's goal and where we're rapidly headed is to have more nodes closer to more users than any other network in human history. And we don't want to just take that network and only deliver content. You know, that would be like finding a gold vein, a gold lode in the ground, and taking one swing with your pickaxe, getting a little nugget and walking away happy when there's an enormous gold lode sitting there in the ground and you're just walking away from it. So you're like, we're not that dense. You know, we're going to keep swinging that pickaxe and keep mining gold. And once you build this network, there's a lot of things you can do beyond just deliver content. So it's really assemble this network. And the best way to assemble the network right now is with a content delivery network. And then as the network grows, we're going to add additional services, storage and compute. And, you know, and then in the future, if other nodes want to jump on board and supply a bunch of GPUs, whether for AI inference or rendering or whatnot, of course, we're more than welcome to do that. In the meantime, we may work with other great groups that are doing that as well. You know, because Saturn is a platform.
Let people build their own, you know, apps.
Exactly.
On the Saturn wall.
Exactly.
That's a fun future.
So we've found a very strong incentive mechanism to get a bunch of hardware all added to the network. As we've seen, you know, we've grown faster than any other network, and there's a lot that network can do beyond just serving data in a content delivery network.
Well, one of the other things that we talk about a lot is the evolving regulatory environment, you know, particularly like, you know, the high profile stuff, like there's these ETF talks, and here in the US, there's like a lot of like conflicting emotions and opinions about the regulatory environment and all this. But, you know, in the space that you're in, traditionally it's been technology driven, and, you know, people like content, they want content. But could you share, you know, as you've been building out this platform, have you run into headwinds with the regulatory environments in various countries? Has it been a non-issue, or would you like to see any changes to the regulatory environment towards the type of tech that you guys are building?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So knock on wood, so far, we've not run into any real regulatory issues. And that doesn't mean there aren't there. It's just so far we have not run into any. One of the biggest questions regulatory-wise is not so much about tokens and cryptocurrency and whether they're a security or not. Like, those are like fundamental regulation. That's fundamental regulation that affects all of crypto, not just Saturn, you know? But one of the key regulatory aspects, if you zoom in a little deeper, is actually around content. What content is legal in what places? Because this varies wildly and can change rapidly. And to have a world-scale computer, a world-scale network like Saturn, what does it mean to store a piece of a picture of Tiananmen Square if you're a node in China, right? Or what happens if you're a node and you're just like, I don't want to support any Russian companies because I'm with Ukraine in the war. And it's like, so what happens if there's a Russian user of Saturn and they want to store content on there, and just me, for my own personal beliefs, don't want to cache that content? So it's not so much regulatory. It can be, you know, regulatory with a government saying this content is not allowed or is banned, but also just the fact of regulation on what content is legal in a given area. And this has come up, you know, like this has come up in terms of, you know, like some nodes saying, I don't want to cache this or do want to cache that. And the benefit actually here of Saturn is you as a node operator, you have agency to decide what you want to cache and how you want to cache that. It is all open source software. And so if you do not cache a piece of content from your own volition, you just don't serve that content to the network. And that means that if someone requests it near you, you're not going to be rewarded for serving that content. But you ultimately, as a node operator, are in charge of your own node. You can do as you please on your own node, cache or not cache content as you choose. And so again, this is one of the advantages of a network like Saturn, is that there's some nodes who will say, I'm okay caching and serving this content, and that network can live and exist, and the network can be served by those nodes. And other nodes can say, no, I through regulatory reasons or personal beliefs, do not want to cache this kind of thing. So no, at a high level regulation, Saturn has so far, fortuitously, serendipitously perhaps, not run into any kind of regulatory headwinds that aren't general large headwinds that affect all of crypto. But one of them that is germane to Saturn is the kind of content. Because again, these are nodes that are caching content, and what is that content and what content are they comfortable caching? Because a lot of types of content out there.
As they say, information is power. So you guys are going to, you know, I mean, whether you want it to be or not, I mean, what if someone wanted to build a decentralized Twitter and they want to use Saturn to spread it? Should they be allowed to say those certain things through Saturn? You know, at least you're pushing the control to the individual, and the individual has their own governance by the local jurisdiction.
That's right.
They can deal with it on that basis, but you're forming a protocol in a broad sense.
That's exactly right. And so to me, this is a real power of Saturn over other CDNs in the past. Essentially, if it's humanity's network and it's owned by humanity, then all of humanity should be represented in some way. That doesn't mean that all of humanity has to support the rest of humanity. So Twitter's a good example. You know, like, let's say there's someone on Twitter who's saying something you really don't like and posting images you don't like, and you as a node operator, like, you know, screw this guy, I don't want to support him. You can not cache all that person's content on your node, and you can choose to do that. And there's nothing the network can do to stop you from doing that. You just kind of lose rewards that you would have received from serving that content. But that's your decision to make. That is your agency and your independence to make that decision. But there are likely other nodes in the network who are totally okay with that. Maybe they're supporting whoever's making these statements on Twitter, posting these on Twitter, in which case that person's content still is cached and still delivered worldwide. It is a network owned by humanity where people can make these decisions for themselves, including the nodes that are supplying this capacity.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, that's awesome. No, so Ishan, that's all I had in terms of questions. I mean, obviously I got a couple of last questions to wrap up, but Ishan, I want to give you some space in case you have any other questions for Ansgar.
Yeah, so I think, you know, the one question that we always ask people that we'll love to get everyone's opinion on is like, you know, what do you think needs to happen on like the decentralization, blockchain and crypto side for like to get mass adoption, right? To onboard, you know, quote unquote, the next billion users or whatever onto Web3 applications?
Yeah, and this is a question that I wrestle with and look in the mirror as well every day, and ask, because there's a lot of opportunity and frankly a lot of gaps for us to get there with the next billion users. So one of the things that I really feel is lacking, and if I had to pick one word, is just kind of infrastructure and tooling. So let me give you an example. Like, if you're a developer, which we are building Saturn, and you want to build things in a fully decentralized way, there are just not tools that exist outside of Web3 that you build like YouTube scale products on. So let me give you a classic example. Like for Saturn, data is generated. It's generated by nodes. It's generated by clients. It's, you know, needs to be stored and processed. There's no just kind of like drop-in replacement for S3, like if you want to store data somewhere and read and write rapidly. There's no kind of drop-in replacement for Postgres, a database that's distributed. So there's all these tools and software that's been built by the human race over decades, and it's like a pebble in a stream has been smoothed over by decades of use and lessons learned that just doesn't exist in Web3. And what that means is it's slower to get started. And you just like, there's gaps in your toolbox. So imagine there are two people that sit down to build a house and they bring all their tools and you say, okay, now go build the house. And you got to build the best damn house you possibly can. And the guy in Web 2 looks down, he's got a plethora of tools in his toolbox. And the guy in Web 3 looks down and his toolbox has 4 tools and half of them are rusted and just not like developed yet. It's like in a tech chain, you know, you play like a StarCraft video game or something, your tech chain, or Age of Empires, your tech chain is just not as far along as, you know, like Web 2 is. And to me, that is a huge problem because it just slows everything down. You know, like for me personally, I don't give a shit about like Web3 Instagram or whatnot. Like you have to build a better product. You can't just slap the Web3 prefix in front of something else that's successful. To me, that's not compelling. Other people, that's fine. But to me, that's not compelling. So what's compelling is products that are better. Like you build something in a crypto incentivized or decentralized way and you get a better product. Again, one of the things that's so exciting with Saturn to me is you can do that because you can build a larger network faster than ever before, and that yields a faster content delivery network that's cheaper. But like, there are a lot of hurdles there of just like, there are pieces that are missing for decentralized compute, trusted compute. There's no solution there right now, you know, and then just like other building blocks, the Lego bricks, if you example, you look in the Web3 box of Legos, there's just far fewer Lego pieces to snap in place. And that hurts end users as well. If we talk about the next billion users, like if you wanted to build a better version of Instagram or Reddit or whatnot that's crypto incentivized, it's just going to be slower to build it because you don't have these Lego bricks to snap into place. So that's one big piece.
Very cool. Yeah, I always felt that, like, you know, today there's so many developers, right? It used to be, I feel like it used to be that like people built things and then you built infrastructure because, you know, you don't build infrastructure before you've built the actual thing, right? You don't build an airport before an airplane exists. You don't build, you know, train tracks before trains exist. But now I feel like we've gotten to the point where like there's demand, but you know, if you don't have the if developers can't use infrastructure to build it, then no one's ever going to build that thing because people don't want to write all the software that already exists from scratch.
That's a really good analogy. I'm going to run with that now. I love that analogy. I'm pilfering that analogy, but I'm going to run with it.
It's okay. I stole it from somewhere else.
Here's how I'm going to run with your analogy. It's like airports already exist, planes already exist. That's like a Web 2. And now Web 3 is like, we're going to try and build a better airplane, but we have to build the infrastructure and the airplane at the same time, but we can't use all the tools and tech that they built their airports and airplanes with. So it's like, we're trying to build we need to build a better product. No one's going to step on a Web 3 airplane until it's a better, faster, cheaper experience than a Web 2 airplane. But we don't have access to all the tools that everyone built and all the tech stack that everyone built the Web 2 airports and airplanes with. But that exists. Like, that's what we're competing against. To get 1 billion users, you need to build and compete and build better products that already exist out there. Like, it's not enough just to build new infrastructure with new tools. You have to be better. Like, my mom does not give a shit about whether it's decentralized or not in many ways. Like, build a better product. That's how you get people to use your stuff. Be better. Make something people want. And so that's what we need to do. And it's tough to make something people want and compete with Web 2 airplanes and airports when like a lot of the tooling isn't there.
Agreed. Cool. Well, that wraps up all the questions that I had. I know, Wes, you had 1 or 2 final questions.
This is killer. Ansgar, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, we're learning a ton from this conversation, and it's always fun to compare notes to other people who are actively spending their days building in this space. The last question I have is, how can folks get involved in Saturn? How can they participate? What can we direct them to learn more, to get involved and start helping out with the network?
That is a great question. So the most important piece, your new favorite website of the year 2023 is saturn.tech, saturn.tech. That is our website. You can go there and read all about Saturn. A great way to participate is if you have access to a data center or knowledge of how to run a node, go jump in the network. You can go download the software. It's a Docker container. You start running the Docker container, join the network, start earning Filecoin. That's easy. The other piece is just get involved with the software. It's all open source. So all of us on the team are easily reachable on Filecoin Slack. Jump on in. You can DM me. I'm Ansgar there. And the other key piece is if you are loading content, whether it's in a website or an app, and you want fast, cheap content delivery network, jump on in. Like, Saturn is now getting to the point where it's like you can jump in and use it as a product. So if you run a website, start using Saturn, and you can get involved with the community, see how that works. And I'd love to speak with you. Yeah.
I love it. And for folks that are running a website and want to use Saturn, what's the best example? Like maybe some of their images they might cache in Saturn.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a classic example where Saturn is a fortuitous fit is like NFT websites. So anything that loads multimedia, I should say. And NFT websites are just happening website that loads lots of multimedia. Podcast websites. That's another great example. Like anything that has images, audio, video, any kind of multimedia. These are generally larger files that are retrieved many times by millions of people around the world. That is a germane fit for a content delivery network, of which Saturn is a up and roaring, incipient, proud member of the content delivery network. And our goal, like I said, singularly, is to be the world's best content delivery network in human history. So, if you store push any content, load any content, come join the party, man.
Woo! All right, we'll get ready for the DFI bump on the Saturn network. Hold on. Hold on.
like the slash not effective your. Yeah.
That's exactly right. We're going to test it. All right. Well, thank you, Ansgar, for taking some time with us. This has been a pleasure.
No, Wes, Ishan, it was a pleasure to be here, an incontrovertible pleasure. And to everyone listening, awesome. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, you know it. This was great. All right, I'm rooting for you.
Kick ass, make history, guys. Yeah.
Bye.
Woo. Cheers.